All right. Setting up. Done redirecting. Here we go. Oh, jeez. No.
Gotta check our hair and makeup.
Yeah, right. Hold on here. Where's my yeah. Yeah, okay. So I'm gonna let's see. Okay. I'm wondering if it might be better, I don't know, to not be plugged, have headphones or to have headphones.
We can consider this to be our beta tested episode. So when we watch it back, we can see if we can hear ourselves properly.
I'm wondering if it might be better, I don't know. See? To not be plugged, have I have this delay going on, so headphones. I'll tell you what,
We can consider this to be our beta tested episode. So when we watch it back, we can see if we can hear ourselves properly.
I'm wondering if it might be better, I don't know. See? To not be plugged, have I have this delay going on, so I'll tell you what,
we can consider this to be our beta tested episode. So when we watch it back, we can see if we can hear ourselves properly.
I'm wondering if it might be okay, so now you can hear me? You can hear
Yes, I
me?
can. And it's still picking up the audio from the YouTube video.
Yeah.
Might be too loud on
Can
you.
you still hear the YouTube video?
No.
Okay. All right. I can hear it in my headphones though, but so let's see here. What was the other thing? Oh, I didn't access the intro outro thing here. Yep. Okay. So let's see here. Let me go there. Okay. Trying to, let's see here. Okay. I've got them live here in front of me now.
Perfect. Do you remember when we had our podcast edited and the format was it led in with some like kind of background talking, and then it went into the intro, and then it went into the episode?
Yeah.
So that's something that we can also do when we start the live stream, is that we can have a little bit of conversation at the beginning of the live stream, get ourselves set up, a little pre-conversation, then go into the intro.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Maybe set ourselves up. I can take that time to also post on social medias.
Okay. Now where did that go? I just had it up a second ago. Oh, there it is. I see it. Okay. Hmm. There it is. All right. No, that's not it either. Damn. Okay, hold on. Okay, now I got it. Okay. So, I got the standard introduction here. And then the outro. Okay. All right. So do we just want to go through it?
Perfect. I will start. Welcome to the Epic Voices and Conversations podcast, giving you, the listener, the opportunity to experience, engage, explore, and sometimes share stories of energy, passion, inspiration, and connectedness. We are your hosts, Raquel Buchanan
And Dave Mathews. Our real jobs between doing these podcasts are being mental health providers, therapists, and group facilitators, working with people whose issues are related to high stress, trauma, violent behavior, and intimate partner or family violence.
We intend for these podcasts to provide professionals working with children, youth, and adults who have experienced trauma or violence some hope and support to build self-awareness, increase professional self-care strategies, which is a part of providing trauma-informed care, and to help in developing resilience while doing the work in the field.
The Epic Voices and Conversations podcast is brought to you by Duct Tape Productions and 1T Productions.
Buckle up and settle in. Prepare for some interesting conversation, stimulating discussion, and hearing passionate voices.
Here we go, Raquel, right?
And I am sharing with our audience right now on Facebook, so they will get a notification that we are live. And this is something that I'll start doing at the beginning of our show, is putting that out there for our audiences on social media to have us be a part of their conversation in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'll call this episode the beta episode. We're live streaming on YouTube for the very first time. We will be providing some current information. We can also talk a little bit about the epic moments and what that really means. So what's the news in Minnesota, Dave?
What's Minnesota? Oh man. Well, it's not just Minnesota. I think across the country there continues to be a lot of work. A lot of people are putting into trying to continue to figure out what's best to do around violence prevention, around all these things. And of course, all the big information about violence and how violence is being looked into. There's always that kind of concern about why is somebody violent? Why does somebody behave in a way that's hurtful towards somebody else? Right? I mean, that's all very the perplexing question oftentimes. And all the work that we've done around working with men who've been hurtful towards their intimate partners. That's often the question that comes down to things in terms of how we develop our programming and all those sorts of pieces around addressing that issue. It does come down to what is the driving force behind that behavior? What are the elements? What are the factors that are involved in all that whole thing? Unfortunately, over the past 40 years, I think a lot of people have kind of drawn mainly from social science and from some other kinds of views and theories about how people act, and we've kind of just developed a kind of one way to look at it over the years. Increasingly, people are seeing that it's more it's more complex than simple, like what it had been focused on in terms of where violent behavior had come from. And so a lot of our focus really has, my hope is that our focus here with our conversations will help to broaden that understanding of those things.
And it is true that the domestic violence model that's commonly regarded in our field started in Minnesota as a community action plan. And you mentioned it was more of a simpler explanation, a community effort to resolve domestic violence in the community. And throughout the years, we have found that there are other things that may contribute to domestic violence, and that is central to our podcast, right? So what is so different about what we talk about in terms of domestic violence than what you may see somewhere else?
Yeah. Well, and definition of terms and all that sort of thing is important, no doubt about it. It's important that we identify and define all the terms that we're using, and so in defining what abuse is, first of all, is an important element to look at, and that what has often and commonly been considered what abuse violence is domestic violence is some sort of patterned behavior that's hurtful, that is a use of power and control and has an intent to hurt somebody. And many people have those elements of in their definition of what abuse and domestic violence is all about. And some include, of course, kind of another part of that definition also includes the gender-based violence kind of perspective about, male versus female, kind of contributing factors, misogyny, patriarchy, those sorts of things. So definition, I believe has changed and needs to change in that the definition that I use often is very brief and very simple, and it's any action or word that hurts another person. And then intimate partner violence is really any action or word that hurts a partner or former partner or someone that you were engaged with as a spouse or a significant other. So intimate partner violence is one section as it's becoming more understood. Domestic violence is kind of this umbrella term now that covers, 5 or 6 different ways of being hurtful towards somebody within your family, domestic family. So it, it's whether it's intimate partner abuse or whether it's domestic violence really covers the sibling abuse, covers the adult to child abuse that might happen, child abuse, or even the child to parent or elder abuse. All of those things can be, as we are seeing it more, I think, as I'm looking at it, domestic violence is more of this umbrella term. Whereas the intimate partner violence is much more of a specific context in which the violence happens, a spouse or significant other. So, and then again, of course, breaking it down in terms of looking at what is abuse. Again, it's a very simple statement. It's any action or word that hurts your significant other or your spouse. And that leaves out a lot of things that have been considered to be considered to define what intimate partner violence has been over the years. And so some people are uncomfortable with that simple kind of definition. It doesn't include necessarily that it has to be a patterned set of behaviors. It doesn't need to have an intent that's identified to hurt the spouse or the partner, right? And so, I think defining abuse this way also gives us an opportunity to understand more of to be more sophisticated in our understanding of the reasons behind abusive or hurtful behaviors to bigger communities, not just to heterosexual couples, but also within the GLBTQ communities, that we can understand the issue. In addition to when in heterosexual couples, that there's an understanding of a gender-based violence piece. But when we're talking about GLBTQ plus communities, where spouse abuse and abuse between partners is happening, there's some real question about those elements historically of, talking about, gender related pieces and whether or not that makes sense. And I think we haven't been that sophisticated enough to really make that transfer between those communities. And even within other cultures, non-white cultures and non-dominant communities, there's always been a question about whether or not certainly gender-based violence is a factor in non-white communities. Nevertheless, to what degree is that the factor? It might not be the only factor that's involved, which is, again, historically where we've kind of landed as providers in saying it's only about power and control.
I want to take that piece about what you said about historically. So, as I asked the question, what differentiates our understanding of domestic violence from what's commonly out there? When we look at the simple definition of domestic violence, which is an act, doesn't have to be a pattern, but an act that is hurtful to someone, many people can go, no, it's very simple. But when we start to think about violence as being historical and ongoing, that we live in a society and a culture that uses these practices, we can see that it's more normal and naturally occurring, which I think at the same time does help us with the stigma, especially for people who come into therapy because of their use of domestic violence. So if we normalize that you grew up in a society that uses these power and control ways of dealing with things, that's how you also became susceptible to that. And there's that piece that's missing in the domestic violence work, which we really hit, is yes, there's that social piece, which is really important as marriage and family therapists, as social workers, as systems-based practitioners. And then there's the individual psychology and neurobiology
That's
of
right.
human experiences and specific to domestic violence. This is why we're on this
Mhm.
podcast, because we have an expert, Dave Mathews, here to share with us all about his
Mhm.
method of
Mhm.
working with people who are abusive towards their intimate partners or whose abusive behaviors or hurtful
Mhm.
behaviors towards their intimate partners. We also look at that word, how we describe those people. And Dave
Mhm.
has a wonderful theory of what's going on for these individuals and how we can best support them. And then we double down on how practitioners can help too.
Absolutely. And boy, there's several different, there are layers, there are dimensions, and there are multi-dimensional, what I'm calling now, multi-actionable, factors that are involved in understanding, why somebody chooses to be violent. And so it's not just built upon who the gender doing it, but taking into account the many different factors, including those that you mentioned, Raquel, just now, which is the physiological factors. And as I've been observing it and seeing it, and as I've been reading more about the physiological things and understanding how polyvagal systems theory works within this process, and how we need to pay attention to the brain functioning in the moment when we are stressed, when our brain is caught up in those moments of dysregulation. Those are factors. Those are additional factors, as well as past experiences of trauma, past experiences of adversity. It doesn't have to be, what some people would call as high, intense kinds of traumatic experiences that affect how our brain functions when we're dealing with adversity, and whether or not we are provided some sort of sense of resolve when we experience adversity or stress. If we don't have that kind of support going through those bad situations when we were children, when we were young youth, or when we were adults, those sorts of things affect how we see things, and then affect our choices today, and affect whether, how, to what degree our choices, or to degree we might use some sort of abusive behavior. But everybody's different, everybody's unique, and everybody has a different level of all of those actors, all of those factors involved. And one of the ways I'm kind of envisioning things being looked at is like a voice print. Okay. Everybody has a unique voice print, like a fingerprint, right? Except these factors are very dynamic because they're always moving. They're always at play in terms of if we're dysregulated, if our brain is triggered at some point, if we're in the context of a very highly stressful situation, or all these factors are different and are dynamic. And so the reason why I would choose to be abusive or hurtful towards a partner in a situation is ongoingly in process, and that I can reduce the chance of doing it by way of paying attention to what's going on when I am dysregulated and what I need to do to take care of myself in that moment so that I can hopefully choose a more responsive, more of a respectful response in a situation rather than choosing to be abusive. So I think we have a lot more information than we did 40 years ago, or even 20 years ago, or even 15 years ago about all these factors that are at play in these moments when we're making these choices about whether or not we're being abusive.
Yes, and the word you use is choice, this choice. From our perspective, we are not saying that trauma leads to domestic violence or that substance abuse leads to domestic violence, because we know that it does not, that is an isolated event that can occur with something else. But what we're looking at is we're looking at how trauma does impact someone's choice, how their beliefs and attitudes, their sense of safety, their sources of resilience, their understanding of the world and of themselves and others is affected by their traumatic experiences, whether that be big T, bunch of little t's. But we're also looking at not only beliefs and attitudes, but how trauma changes your neurobiology and how it wires you in such a way to have a propensity for certain behaviors and actions or ways of seeing the world. And what we really want to do is we really want to reframe this understanding so that we can help with things like the big word in the field is recidivism. How can we ensure that people have the most skills and tools, the most knowledge, the most beneficial ways to understand a phenomena in order to assist themselves in the future? This is something that still needs to be charted too. When we look at the implementation of trauma-informed groups and recidivism, and also looking at the crosses between recidivism, maybe we're not only reoffending for domestic violence, but for other things related to crime and criminality. This says a lot about people's life and what's normal in their context. And when we start to understand those things, and we have to understand how trauma affects not only our thoughts, but the way that we regulate, we can show up in ways that do not re-traumatize people, which is something that we are trying to avoid when we're working with people who are highly traumatized. And as we know, the people who are most highly traumatized are more likely to be those ones who are incarcerated or in trouble with the legal system or with extensive experiences with substance abuse.
I'm so glad you raised particularly initially that point about, our talking about factors, multiple factors of what brings somebody in, what affects, what influences, what contributes to that kind of place of having that propensity and potentially that propensity to making a choice in a certain direction, is not an excuse, right? It's not an excuse, it's an explanation. And I think more and more of us are becoming more familiar with those kinds of distinctions of being an explanation, that these factors are more explanations for what brings somebody to those choices. And, the CDC has done huge amounts of research around, the adverse childhood experiences studies and all those things that have those multiple things that contribute to and influence later behavior and health and the way in which health our health ends up. And what we know is between, if somebody has a ACEs score of 6 or 7 or higher, without any sort of interventions, and if there's a likelihood they're going to shave literally 20 years off their life. And that's not just about being exposed to domestic violence. That certainly is one of those 10 original kind of adverse experiences. But that's what we see there is that adverse experiences are what are really more key here than even just exposure to domestic violence.
Progression of illness. We are talking about progression of illness. That CDC study that you regarded in terms of the ACEs comes with a triangle, the pyramid that we are very familiar with, how things build upon other things and lead to premature death, like you mentioned, in individuals who experience trauma. But we're talking about initial exposure to a traumatic situation, which even underneath that is these aspects of privilege, these underlying sources of resilience that people have, and then they experience trauma. So we have our underlying foundation of who I am and what I was born into, the traumatic experience, and then in between we have these pockets of help, assuming that we get this help. And if we do not, for a variety of reasons, this is why we want this podcast, is so that we can change the cultural understanding, the societal understanding of what domestic violence looks like in recovery, so that we can help people from getting from exposure to trauma to premature death. So what happens in the meantime is, and I tell my clients and the guys and women in the group, is that when you experience trauma and you're like 8, when you go to school, none of your friends are talking about this. No one's saying anything about it. It makes you believe that you're not supposed to talk about it. So then there comes social dysfunction. And that's where it starts. You start to feel isolated from your peers. You can't have the same conversations as them. So you start hanging out with people who can relate, right? Or if you come from a single family household and your mom or dad is out working and at 6 p.m. you're at the park, who else is at the park at 6 p.m.? And so we progression of exposure to trauma and people's attempts to cope in their best effort. And then after being exposed to, certain people at the park who tell you, hey, you should try this. And then you try that and, you don't have the resilience to be able to navigate through that. We see that, substance abuse impacts your health outcomes, and that creates, bodily dysfunction. And then people become susceptible to early death because of this progression. And so it's a clear progression if we are not careful about the interventions that we provide for people.
Yeah. Yeah, and that just has screamed out to me in so many situations and stories that I've taken in and been able to hear from different folks, and that unresolved stresses, and people are uncomfortable with talking about trauma and stress. Okay, within because they're concerned that again we're going back to, well, that's what caused their choice to be. But we need to understand it in terms of the influencers of those things that lead you described, which is the brain changes, the way in which some people's physiological processes are affected and are change over time. As you said, what fires together wires together. And if somebody is used to experiencing high levels of adverse experiences, their brain is going to kick into that place and result in those bad health outcomes, as well as those other and potential death. Now, there are, yes, and how do we, and how from my standpoint, then another question is, then how do some people get through those moments of adversity who might have high levels of experiences like that? And I would suggest that they've had some more exposure to resiliency building kinds of experiences, that the counterbalance to their experience of those adversities has to do with having some sort of moments or some sort of ways that their stresses have been resolved, or they felt they've been balanced in a way that they build resilience from there. And even though they have those kinds of bad experiences, they're able to bounce back. They're able to not allow those things to affect them as much because of those other resilience kinds of experiences.
Yes.
So just one other piece about that is that some people will say, well, if we're talking with males and females, and females experience as many of these bad things, adversities as well, why aren't they as showing up as much as in the killers, and why, and and I say, again, here's a factor. The factor there is factor civilization as a male is a factor in that process of making that decision and contributing factor to that decision of being abusive. Now, it's again, it's not the only factor, but what I would say is that we not only look at, okay, so this guy has this guy who's been he's abused his partner, he's got sexist views, he's got patri patriarch, just very terrorizing. But what were the contributing influencers that brought him to those points of having those kinds of beliefs, right? What was it that, it's a very organic process for him to come to that point of having those misogynistic kinds of thoughts and that thinking. There's an organic process of, when he was growing up in terms of how women were treated or not treated, and how that felt to him as a male observing that. That for sure is a necessary element to really address for a lot of men in situations. But it doesn't mean that it's the only factor, right?
Yes. So before I get to our pop culture section of our podcast, because that's something that I love, I want to break for our just midsection break. And I want to let you know that if you have an agency, company, or group that you would like to feature on this podcast or would like to advertise your own show, please reach out to us at evacpodcast@gmail.com. We would love to partner and collab with you. When you're talking about these decisions that people make that are poor, or maybe ones that get them in trouble, this reminds me of a movie that I just saw, Inside Out 2. Have you seen Inside Out 2?
I've seen that yet. I want to see that though. Absolutely. I do want to see that.
Great movie. Great movie. I recommend seeing the first one and the second one because it really bridges them together, because it does show a trauma-informed perspective on feelings. And in our movie, Inside Out, it's centered around a teenage character, a teenage girl. And this time in her life, she's going through hormones, and she's going through the developmental process that we all go through, and establishing new feelings and insights and understanding. Well, during Inside Out 2, Riley, that's her name, the character's name, Riley makes a choice that is very poor, one that gets her in trouble. And what you see is a series of things happen before she makes this poor choice, right? And what I really saw was that at the beginning of the movie, we have core beliefs and self-concepts about like things that we believe about ourselves fundamentally. Riley's an athlete, and so she believes that she is good. She's a good friend. She's a good person. She's good. We want this belief. And then over time, she has these experiences socially that lead her to believe I am good enough. So we have beliefs from the world and beliefs about the world that also help us navigate. There is a very big bridge between I am good and I am good enough. And so when we have those aspects of I am good enough, it starts to make us think maybe I'm not good enough in some regard. And these are all things that were established by our interactions and experiences externally. So when we go back to that image about that guy who comes into treatment, he's made a poor choice. He's had these life experiences. We also have to take into consideration, what is the world telling them about who they are, and how is that contributing to their sense of self and the decisions that they make, including the poor ones. So when I work with individuals who have been referred to therapy because of domestic violence, I really am careful about the language that I use to describe them, or even the way that I come off and respond, because many of them have had experiences psychosocially that give them a negative belief about themselves in context with the world.
And you hit on a really important piece, particularly initially about the movie and about what it depicts about we can have all these wonderful values and core beliefs and elements about and that information is really well connected in the top part of and the front part of our brains. It really is, that's where the decision-making process happens, in those parts of our brain, those core values and those things that kind of, we like to say, guide our life, But when we're caught up in the dysregulated place, that's not what we're able to access. And this girl, obviously, it goes back to trying to deal with the stress that she's feeling in the moment as a way to function, to get through it, right? And so these are where those choices are influenced by the in the moment kinds of situations that can't access or have a less capability to access, or the brain really is about our values that guides that tends to, in the moment when we're stressed, not guide our behaviors. And so yes, and in terms of being able to have, then how do we refer to in our programs? How do we refer to who they are versus versus what they've done? And using terms even like I've begun to eliminate my use of the term perpetrator or offender even, not because well, a lot of people want to hold on to those terms because it indicates that they've certainly done wrong, right? And it's kind of a punishment term versus again what I think is more helpful, which is to identify and help better understand what they've been through, you know, and what has brought them to this point, and what's been going on for them that brings them to that. And so, having done abusive behaviors, not necessarily being an abuser or a batterer in these cases, right? And using labels or terms that are more descriptive of things they've done. None of us want to be known or be seen or judged on some of the any one of the bad behaviors that we might have done. And so I think that the change of our vocabulary, the change of how we reference to the people that we work with, definitely is something that we have to kind of keep shaping and altering.
In part of our podcast, we invite a variety of individuals to come and talk about their experiences of more specifically than trauma resilience. So we do speak a little bit about that aspect of trauma, from firsthand accounts from people who have either worked with or been a part of some sort of traumatic life event. And we want to hear from them. What was that experience like for them and what helped them get by? Because we live in a society that really values the word trauma dumping, right? So we really understand what trauma dumping is. And in talking to my clients recently, I've come up with the understanding that trauma dumping is just talking about trauma without a resolve, without any sort of change in the negative beliefs or the distress. And so what we want to do is not just make you aware of trauma, but make you aware of how we can change it both individually and collectively. And we do that by using coping strategies, mindfulness tools. We have the epic moments list, which is something that both Dave and I use on a regular basis. And we invite a variety of people to come share their epic moments. What gives them energy, passion, inspiration, and connectedness in the field to continue the work.
Absolutely. And that I'm finding more and more how key that demonstration, that modeling is for people, because particularly the people in the groups that I do, that oftentimes that we don't have the vocabulary to describe the mindfulness things that we need to do, to the self-talk, positive self-talk, affirmations. We often are just kind of uncertain, and sometimes we it's hard to invent these affirmations or these alternative ways of thinking, or these epic moments, because we don't think that it's not important to think about that stuff. But the more what I'm seeing more and more, the more that we're providing people with the role modeling, the examples, the specific kind of dialogue that we can have for ourselves, the more that people can kind of take those on and can kind of see how those fit themselves. That I think is critical in terms of helping people and help us as professionals as well, in terms of hearing other professionals express those moments that really help them to get through difficult situations and dealing with a particular person or life experience.
So we have about let's say 10 minutes left in our podcast today, our beta episode. And I look forward to watching this back and seeing what we can do to improve the experience of the audience. But I wonder if we should run through an epic moments list to show our audience what we're talking about.
We can do that, absolutely. Um, so so EPIC stands for energy, passion, inspiration, and connectedness. And I've added now what I in addition to the connectedness piece, there's a compassionate connectedness that I think is helpful when we're thinking about these things. Now, this is a tool to allow ourselves to think in moments when we can't work out, we can't hit a pillow, we can't go someplace and get away from what's going on in the moment when we're stressed out about something. These are things to think about in the moment, things to yourself to access a memory about or a sense of. In one case, so we'll start with the E, things that are energizing to you, things that kind of get your engine going and get you kind of feeling uh, pick up and go kind of feeling. Just thinking about those activities that you do, those songs that you hear that, it might be part of your playlist that kind of thinking about working out. And that song's coming up, and it just is like something that you like to at least bring back what that song is that helps you to build your energy. And then there's the passion piece, which has to do with identifying at least a couple things that you're passionate about, you feel strongly about, you think is important. That could be something as big as justice and fairness and equality, or it could be something you're passionate about in terms of family, or it's passionate about an activity that you do. I've had people who've identified being passionate about cooking or being passionate about fishing, and that those are some of the passionate activities that when they think about those things, they just allow themselves to feel back in them. And then there's the inspiration piece, and inspiration has to do with being inspired by other people in one's lives. It has to do with being inspired by something somebody has said. It could be a phrase, or it could be a prayer, or it could be just a word. It could be the poster of the cat, hanging onto the bar, that image can be inspirational to, hang in there kind of thing. But inspiration, and then there's the compassionate connections, which is about creating some sort of connection to create a moment in time when you've been given some sort of compassion. Somebody has connected with you in a way that is memorable during that moment, where they might have gave you some support or some sort of words of encouragement in a time when you felt that things were really difficult, all the way to situations where you certainly might have just felt not alone. You felt connected to somebody in that moment, and so a moment of difficulty. So having those images of things that energize you, things that you're passionate about, things that inspire you, and those things that you feel in the past have you felt these connections to other people in your life, what can help to be in the moment, to use what we call those epic moments.
Wonderful. I will share a little bit of mine. So it gives me energy. I definitely coffee, but more so the act of coffee. When I think about the smell of coffee in the morning, when I think about the taste of the cold brew in the morning, it gives me energy. I don't even have to drink it yet, but I think about that and it gets me up in the morning. In terms of passion, I think about all of the people out there who I have not met yet. I think about the new people, new clients who've come into my life, and it really does ignite my passion for the work that I do. In terms of inspiration, I rest on my role models. You know, Dave, you're one of them. Getting me up every Tuesday to talk about domestic violence is just, I wouldn't want life any other way. And I have wonderful mentors. And then when I think about connectedness, inspiration and connectedness is I live in a wonderful community. I have wonderful neighbors who value the same things that I value, and being able to just wave at them on a daily basis is something that keeps me connected. Knowing that I do the work for them.
Beautiful. Wonderfully said. So being able to use just great examples, Raquel, I really appreciate that. And yeah, and certainly the set. And I'll I'll save mine for next time, and share some of that. All right.
Well, we have successfully completed our first YouTube episode. Let's get them with an outro, Dave.
Oh dear, I gotta get there. Okay, hold on. Hold on. All right. It's all about practice, right? It's all about practice. So, let's see here. Okay, let's see. There it is. All right. All right, let's go.
This has been the Epic Voices and Conversations podcast. If you want to send us feedback or have questions, please email us at evacpodcast@gmail.com.
Oh,
We intend for these podcasts to provide professionals working with people who have experienced trauma or violence some hope and support to build self-awareness, increase professional self-care strategies, and to help in developing resilience while doing the work in the field.
we look forward to releasing the next episode in the series of this podcast soon.
The Epic Voices and Conversations podcast is produced by Duct Tape Productions and 1T Productions. We are your hosts, Raquel Buchanan and
Dave Mathews. Thanks for tuning in. And we hope that you find ways to focus on your own self-care and your epic moments. Till next time.
Great job. I love our conversation today.
All right, very cool. Let's turn that up. Let me see here. Where's that here? Okay. Let's see. Let me turn that. There it is. Okay. There it is. So I'm going to. Okay.